Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we can now start our discussion. Participants are welcome to ask questions or make comments. Do you like me to? Before? Okay. Let me share the rules with all participants. Of course, we are not ignoring Egypt. If you can make questions or comments and on the presentation that you have heard. I think the rule in the practice here is in all our meetings that we take a few comments and questions from the audience at a time, and then our speakers will have the time and the opportunity to respond, and we shall continue like this. I also would like to ask participants to introduce themselves before interventions or before asking questions. Despite the request for taking the floor that we heard, the Secretariat put here for me to ask to give the floor first to Ms. Adriana Mobelia, one of our invited experts for plenary, one who has kindly agreed to break the ice with a few observations and perhaps also a question or two. And then, of course, the distinguished representative of Egypt will have the floor. Ms. Mobelia, you have the floor.
Ambassador Sullivan, I have a question. But first, I should like to make a comment.
We journalists have an obligation to speak, to discuss, and debate all problems of the world, including the occupation. However, it's very difficult to talk about the occupation. Very often what happens is that we're under pressure, because frequently when one speaks of the occupation, it's understood as if we were talking against the state of Israel, and that's not true. So what happens is we stop talking about the problems of Palestine because of the pressure that we're under. Now, I will ask my question having made that comment. I'd like to talk about the boycott. Could Ambassador Seposigle talk a little bit about the boycott? Is the government of Palestine taking any measures in order to provide some stimulus? Also, what about civil society and the boycott? Are they the only ones involved?
I thank you. You have the floor, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Hazem Zaki. I'm the Chargé d'Affaires of the Egyptian Embassy here in Quito. I would like to thank you and thank the panels for the presentations. And also, I would like to express my appreciation for the Ecuadorian government for hosting this meeting. And I think I can speak also on behalf of my Arab colleagues that we are very happy to hear all those enthusiastic and supportive statements that came along since yesterday. My question is twofold, actually. The first part is we have talked a lot about the support and the moral support and so on, and I would like to ask, what is your perception about the action in case of Plan B failing? Plan B here, I mean the negotiations that has been going for over 20 years between the Palestinians and the Israelis. So if the time limit of the current negotiations end without reaching a tangible result, what do you think what is your perception of the actions that can be taken by the international community and Latin American countries that can provide an alternative and pressure on the parties to respond to the peace efforts and to really change their course. And I would like to hear more than one proposal, because there is, for example, a suggestion that the Palestine will join all the international institutions, but I suppose this is, we can take this for granted, it can happen. But what are the other steps that can represent a tangible and substantial pressure to make the parties end this long conflict? The second question and suggestion as well. We all know that the Palestinian economy is suffering from great pressures and is under great distress. So I would like to encourage and stimulate the Latin American countries to sit down with the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian state to figure out what can be presented more to support the economy. It doesn't have to be big projects. It can be small and medium enterprises, medium projects, or big projects according to each country's capacity. But we would encourage very much our friends and brethren here in Latin America to join us in the Arab world, and also with the European Union and other countries, to present bigger support for the Palestinian Authority that is suffering a lot. And I wonder, can this be done? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other? Please, madam. Please introduce yourself.
Sí, soy Sandra.
My name is Sandra Correa from the American Society of Jurists. As an introduction, we believe
My name? Sandra Correa.
Sandra Correa from the American Association of Jurists.
Do you understand me? Yes. Thank you. Pensamos que en el planeta
We believe that on the planet,
2%
well, it is said that 2%
de
of
personas
people
que necesitan inferir daño moral a su prójimo.
have suffered moral damages,
A eso le llamamos violencia moral.
moral violence.
Esa violencia moral.
This moral violence
Y quizá el señor Arría
uses, and perhaps Mr. Arria was saying this, it uses compassion of human beings and human beings' desire for peace. It uses the abilities and inabilities of the and weaknesses of the human beings to take advantage of in order to perpetrate their end, which is to keep these problems alive. They don't actually try to solve it, they try to keep these problems very much alive. So if we picture a cascade, a waterfall, such as we have here in the Andes, we see a lot of people trying to push water into the mouth of the sea, when there are a lot of people contaminating the waters. And so this is difficult for those of us who unite for human causes such as this. My question is whether this behavior, which isn't seeking to change itself, has real consequences. What are the measures that the United Nations has taken, concrete measures, that affect the economy of this small group of people whose business is death and the undermining of rights? They treat human beings as things necessary to their ends. Our colleague from Uruguay, Mr. Ferreira, you mentioned Plan Condor. It's amazing that in countries in which Plan Condor was most present, the national institutions for human rights are only recently created. The National Institution for Human Rights in Uruguay was only created at the end of the last century.
Eso es parte de
Is that not part
esta trama.
of this
Evitar
plot?
la organización para
Preventing organization so that
por fin para
when we are finally in the end organized to call for our rights and to call for reparations, so many decades have gone by
metros bajo tierra y ni
and people
siquiera
are under
poder
10 meters under the earth and they
¿No les parece que todo esto es un
haven't
resultado de todos
received
los
the justice they need? I think that it seems like it's the goal is to keep us discussing a solution while there are very few that end up building a utopia. And this has become an MO, really, because for more than 3 or 4 decades of trying to defend the rights of the Palestinian people, our brothers and sisters, it seems to me that it's just it's inefficient, or it's due to inefficiencies that we have not been able to solve this, but rather the abuses have increased with the settlements, for example, abusing the human need for a roof over their heads.
Thank you. But before you, Madam, ask first. Please, you have the floor.
Buen día. Hola.
Please identify yourself.
Mi nombre es.
My name is Alicia Herrera, and I am part of the ecumenical program for support of Israel and Palestine. We are sending volunteers to live in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. Right now we have a volunteer in Hebron from Cuenca. My question is for Mr. Ferreira. I'm also from Uruguay, although I've lived here for some 24 years. My question has to do with the tone that's used to speak of the conflict. It's cast or framed as a conflict between peoples, as if these people had something in their blood that has made it so that they, wherever they are, New York or elsewhere, they're going to be facing off with each other. And I think that confuses the situation. I don't think it helps. It doesn't help to keep us focused on the issue of international humanitarian law. This issue of framing both people as equals and that they have to coexist and that they have to be friends, I think that it takes our focus off of the fact that there is an extremely powerful state that is consistently violating international law, and that this is the topic that we should be addressing. How can we hold accountable this state for these violations? These are duly confirmed violations. There's no need to undertake a deep investigation to confirm them. So in this ambit, within an international organization, when we talk about coexistence, when we talk about resolving this, I think we need to focus on international humanitarian law and how we can ensure that the violating party, the party violating the rights, be held responsible. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. For this round, maybe we will have the last person. You have if you like to make a comment or have a question, please do it now. And after that, we go back. We come to the podium and come back to you again.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. First, a warm greeting to all of the participants. My question is for Ambassador Sabin of Palestine and Brazil. I should also like to ask you, the following. Well, I have a series of thoughts, but they're tied to this issue of the relationship between Brazil and Palestine. I am very aware of the important work that you do to promote initiatives, including trade initiatives. For example, the free trade agreement with Palestine and Brazil. How is that shaping up? Can there be true trade between the two countries given the occupation? Is there some product that has already been traded or that's being traded or that could be promoted within the scope of this free trade treaty or agreement? I should also like to say that it's great that you've mentioned the university initiatives, courses, different departments, different university programs. We are signing what I think is the first cooperation agreement among universities between the University of Sao Paulo and the University del Quds. I think it's the only such agreement with Palestinian University. Perhaps I'm mistaken. Perhaps there are others. And if there are others, I should like to be corrected. But these are initiatives that I would like to know more about. I had noted a series of ideas, but that's fundamentally my question. What can be done within the scope of the initiatives already underway to bolster Palestinian-Brazilian relations? Thank you.
I thank you. We have more requests, but let's come back to the podium, to the members of the plenary, the panel, to answer, to address your questions or if they have comment on your comments. So, or maybe starting from the right side.
Con mucho gusto. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to take the floor. The first question, there's a part that I didn't understand. The human rights institutions you said are from the last century. Or did I understand incorrectly? When was the National Human Rights Institute and Ombudsman created in Uruguay? In 2012. Okay. So it's even, and Plan Condor was in the past century. So while it's impossible to make progress until these bodies exist. Okay, now I understand. Yes. Since there weren't any, and now there are such institutions, it's progress. Yes, but after how many decades? You have a question, right? So allow me to answer it, please. You say that the human rights institutions are from the last century. And it's incredible that they have not made any progress in the protection of human rights. I would answer with the following. In the case of Uruguay, it's not just that it's from the last century, it's from 2 years ago. And over the last 2 years, we have been able to make progress, amazing progress, within the parameters of the Uruguayan society, the equal marriage law and laws on pregnancy as well. I'm sure I'm forgetting 4 or 5 of the most important laws that have come out in the last year, including with the support of the Human Rights Institute. There's protection for many sectors of society that were completely unprotected and vulnerable. The handicapped population, people who had no access to culture or housing. We created a national health plan. I'm going to be frank. This isn't just an individual success. This is collective work. But it's very impressive what we've been able to achieve in 2 years. Secondly, with regard to Plan Condor, among those responsible for Plan Condor in Uruguay, there are none that are currently free. They're all in prison. The president responsible for the coup died in prison, and then the following one as well, in prison. The Minister of Foreign Affairs from the dictatorship is also in prison. So I think that defining Uruguay as a country where impunity reigns, I just don't think that fits the reality. There are civilian ministers of state that have moved ahead with awareness of human rights violations, or rather that have been accused of human rights violations, and they have been sentenced and are in prison. I have the enormous honor of having in my team, in the executive board of my team, the former minister responsible for moving ahead with all of the crimes against humanity trials. And what's more, just several months ago, we had an extradition from the head of the death squad, extradited from Argentina. I was a witness, and he was given the maximum sentence that we have in Uruguay, which is 30 years of prison plus 10 of probation. In the case of Uruguay, the idea that the return to democracy has not been sensitive to the rule of law, it's not true. Has it taken much longer than we would have wanted? Absolutely. Yes. It was a long fight. It was a long battle. 8 years before the creation of the Ombuds's Office and the National Institute for Human Rights, a large coalition was formed by NGOs to support this law that created this institution. And the delay in having this all done is because the law was passed in 2008 with a provision that said that a legislature would approve the institution, but that it would be this next legislature that would assign budget so that they could avoid politicization of the membership. It was also that second legislature that would name the members of that group. So with all due respect, I think that Uruguay is a country where, and even for many years, with a law known as the impunity law, we saw that actually there are 6 volumes that have really been created recently. I would love to be able to pass these along to you, indicating how, using all legal measures possible, that law left room for, we were able to imprison the entire senior staff of the dictatorship. There is no one on the run. There is no one awaiting sentencing or trial. And then there was another comment. I think I would have to differ. I think there are 2 different areas. There's civil society. And I did not say that we see in our Palestinian compatriots and our Jewish compatriots irreconcilable enemies. I said the opposite. I said they're an example of peaceful coexistence. When one of the many conflicts erupted, my Palestinian friend that lives in Tri was able to express this. The Jewish community in Tri and the Israeli community in Tri put together a commission, and on the border that divides the community between Brazil and Uruguay, they planted an olive tree, and they take care of it together, and they do so as a symbol of peace among the 2 collectives. If you understood that I said that these 2 bodies are endemically condemned to confrontation, then you didn't understand it correctly. The Uruguayan state, in its responsibility as a state, has to enforce international laws. And I'll conclude with this, Chairman, because I have spoken too much. Uruguay presided up until very recently the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. And at that body, we were extremely strict in looking at the issue of the occupied territories. We proposed, and the Human Rights Council moved ahead with, the inspection of the occupied territories or the territories occupied by Israel. I would like to say more, but it's time to give up the microphone. Thank you for your questions to both of you.
I would like to ask the members of the panel and also the participants to keep their comments, questions, and answers short if we want to accommodate all questions and views here. Ambassador, some of these questions might be addressed by you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think that you're aware of the fact that I have about 5 questions here that have been put to me. Almost all the questions were addressed to me. And I don't know if I could... Okay.
We have 3 requests and some others.
Uno de nuestros problemas que
One of the problems that we have to tackle is that of information. Yesterday, Mrs. Adriana, you spoke about, it's working, says the interpreter. The microphone is working fine for the speaker, says the interpreter. The interpreter points out that the microphone is working fine, there's no need to change.
usted habló ayer de que
Yesterday, you said that in Brazil, very little is known about the Palestinian question. What we have is an unfair fight, first of all, at all levels, military, economic, informational, and that's quite logical. Moreover, we have scholars here. We have institutions here, and they can speak very clearly. Have they arrived at the most sensitive people from Palestine? Have they let them come in? How many Palestinians have been expelled? You are a witness to the fact that a number of journalists and scholars have been punished. Unfortunately, we find ourselves with people we're using our teeth and our nails against a whole machinery, as we saw yesterday in the movie that was shown. How can you use stones to fight in a situation like that when you have, and also when you have tiny means of communications? The media is so small that's available to us, and we're fighting Global, which is the big TV network in Brazil, as the interpreter. How can you deal with what you see on TV there, and you see the Palestinian and the Jew trying to pacify the situation? It is an unfair fight, and we are not going to give up, and I truly hope that we will never give up. And that brings me to jump to the last question asked, and I want to say I agree with you. The problem is not between peoples. The problem is not between communities. The problem is with what's being imposed. It even goes beyond the level of Israel and Palestine. It reaches other levels at the international level, the financial capital, those who control that, and those of us who are working and selling our efforts in the labor market. The problem is not in Uruguay, we cannot, or other countries, we cannot remain silent. We need to denounce the occupier with clear words and with actions and acts that are tangible. Now here I'll jump to another question, and I want to say that there are other pathways available. We need to boycott Israel, especially the occupation. I hope there's no misunderstanding here. We're not against Israel. Let me be very clear about that. We're against the occupation with all of its harmful consequences. We are for the independence of Israel and Palestine. Neither Israel nor is Palestine independent at this point in time. We need to work. I remember once Getulio Vargas, I think you were here, and I said Israel needs to be reborn. Take one sentence. And now I'm paying for the consequences of that sentence. Israel needs to disappear. What Israel? Yes, the Israel of occupation. In no way are we against Israel. We've signed agreements, and those agreements have consequences. We know who wants peace and who doesn't want peace. The Jews, activists, and many others have a word in common. We're working together, both physically and with regard to the physical wall, we're trying to bring it down, and the conceptual wall between us, we're trying to bring that down as well. If we talk about the boycott, both the government and the PLO and the organizations in the PLO, as well as civil society, boycotting the occupation and all of its consequences. In this case, the settlements which are embedded in our territory illegally. To conclude, there was an end, there was a failure to the negotiations. I don't think there's any other way. I agree with what other colleagues have said. The solution is not war. Israel has done everything in its power to do ethnic cleansing. 80% of Palestinians were expelled. And those are not my words. Alan Pape is an activist, an Israeli activist from Haifa. He lives in Haifa. And he lived through the experience and talked about it. He talked about this ethnic cleansing. They killed, assassinated, and we too. We have also, through violence, violent actions and alliances in all sorts of ways, and we've reached the conclusion that Israel will not put an end to Palestine militarily. I promised I would speak slowly, and now I've been breaking my promise. I'm speaking quickly. There is no other solution other than the peaceful solution. Moreover, above and beyond the United Nations and its agencies, there's a right at play here. That's not negotiable. We are a member, well, rather, as a non-member state, we have access to some 18 UN agencies for membership, and above and beyond that, we need to take other approaches. And I must say that amongst the various activities, this conference is one of them, and let's see what we come out of this with. Mr. Chairman, we need to come out of this with something specific, something tangible, to be able to boycott and compel Israel. Yes, sir, Mrs. Asali was speaking very clearly. The human beings and states are sensitive to pressures brought to bear, and we're also sensitive to the stimulus. So let's stimulate the Israelis, provide an incentive to those who are in favor of peace, and bring pressure to bear on those who are against peace on both sides, and make them understand there's no other path. The Palestinian economy in Latin America. I think Latin America can do a great deal to stimulate small business. It is profitable to work in Palestine, despite the occupation. Many Palestinians have returned or have invested in Palestine, taken their capital with them. It is profitable, and it's also profitable for Latin Americans to invest in Palestine. There are two very important areas for investment. One is tourism, especially religious tourism. I would invite you to go and visit Palestine. And don't go to the settlements. Don't go to the institutions that are within Jerusalem, West Jerusalem. Do not provide a stimulus for the occupation. I believe it's possible to set up charters and groups. That's part of the economic punishment that we're suffering. Our economy is only running at 50%. Many of us leave here, go, sleep, and visit Jerusalem, go to Tel Aviv, and then go to Bethlehem, bringing a sandwich and water. What's my work? Cleaning. There's no return for the economy of Palestine. That's not stimulating peace. Ladies and gentlemen, once we have a true peace, both Israel and Palestine have much to gain, so much to gain. Because what we have in historical Palestine, no one else has in the world. Everybody has oil, uranium, gold, etc. But nobody has what we have. It's the only place where we have the source of religion, philosophy, culture, trade, is that territory. So we have much to gain. External forces that are compelling us to see each other as enemies of each other. Arling is still not activated. Possibly the agreement on free trade. It was signed, but we're still waiting for approval in the Congress, both in Brazil and in other countries. For example, Paraguay. We can sell olive oil and derivatives, and we can also sell more based on the trade, especially tourism, religious tourism. We have a trade balance of $200,000. It's, of course, insignificant compared to the $27 million with the Arab countries. That's between Brazil and the Arab countries. But we have a pretty good trade surplus, which went from $6 to $27 million. I would like to congratulate them for signing that agreement with Jerusalem. We need to provide an incentive to the rest so that agreements are signed and so that trade or exchange takes place in those areas that we can support. For example, summer camps, and not like we're doing now in Israel or Palestine. Bring Israelis, Jews, and Palestinians to Quito, to a university or some place where they can live side by side and see that other people are living side by side harmoniously. I think that's part of the work that you can do in the academic world. We also have agreements signed between Pelotas and Guyas. Thank you very much, and I apologize for having been lengthy.
Thank you. If there is any other comment, Mr. Area?
Maybe a la señora Clemencia, solo...
Only Al-Gut had convention with Brandeis. I'm on the board of Brandeis University for the International Policy Studies School, and recently we broke ties with Brandeis University and Al-Gut, and the president, who is an intellectual, Palestinian, prominent intellectual. All the members of the board, including me, we opposed it, and the entire faculty, which is fully Jewish, also reacted against what the president did. It was one of those Nazi-type reactions to Sadhguru. So I'm very pleased that you were able to talk about it, and then the University of Sao Paulo and Brandeis resuming. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions, comments? Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I have two questions.
Can you introduce your...
My name is Pedro Charbel. I'm from the University of Sao Paulo Palestinian Front and the Front for the Solidarity with the Palestinian People. I have two questions, one for Mr. Ferreira, one for Mr. Asbin. First, to Mr. Ferreira, I would like to say before my question that I was very moved with your story relating to the military regime in your country. I have many friends and family that were involved in the struggle in Brazil, and unfortunately we are far behind Uruguay in the transactional justice process. We don't have any perpetrator or any sort of general, anyone responsible for the Condor operation. No one is in jail or have been persecuted. And we cannot do that because they have got immunity. And my question is related to this. And for a coincidence from the universe, I just got an email from Ruth Hedler. I believe some of you know her. She's one of the founders of New Profile, an Israeli NGO that works with people that try not to serve the army and try to denounce how militarized the Israeli society is becoming. And who just sent me that Omar Saad, a Palestinian Druze conscience objector, was convicted for the 6th time for prison because he doesn't want to serve the army. So my question is relating to this. How you, sir, think that we from Latin America can contribute to Israel in the matter of transactional justice? Because if we think, as this panel is called, in a solution that is general, just, and that leaves lungs, we shall start considering the persecution of the war criminals inside Israel that committed war crimes according to international law and that today are there living free. So how the international law that developed so well in Latin America relating to these crimes against humanity and war crimes can contribute to this transitional process in Israel. My question to Mr. Ibrahim is relating to the diasporas here, not in the way I agree with my fellow complainant from the EAPPI that the diasporas are not the question, the conflict is not between people, but how education can affect the diasporas and people living in Israel. I will refer to the work of the well-known Israeli scholar Nurit Peled, who just wrote a book about the Israeli school books. And I would also like to refer to the fact that now we have been struggling, even in Brazil, in Jewish schools, to talk about Palestine in a way that is not changed by the political interest or the official interest of the state of Israel. For instance, mentioning the catastrophe, the Nakba in 1948, and all those things that are now not written in Israeli books, and either in the books that Jewish schools where many of the diaspora attend. So what is the role of education and how the PA is working on this to promote such knowledge that should be aware for everyone? This is part of the history of all humanity, and especially it's part of the history of the Israelis. And then I can mention another Israeli organization that I admire very much, Zochrot, which in Hebrew means remembering, and they've been having a great effort to tell Israelis about what happened in 1948, because that's also part from their history, so we should all be having this common knowledge. So what is the role of education and how the PA is working on this? Thank you.
I thank you. And please, sir.
Yo soy Rosalvo Salgueiro de...
I am from Service, Peace and Justice in Latin America in the Brazilian chapter. This is a human rights defense organization which is in 15 countries throughout Latin America. And I'm from Brazil, from the Brazilian chapter. I'm concerned because I think that our peoples need to embrace this cause. And the news that we get are from the media. That's the information we have. And often experts in universities provide information, but basically the people are very far from this problem. And one way of bringing them closer would be to have an exchange of people, bring Palestinians to our countries. But we know how difficult it is to even enter in Palestine. It's not easy. But here we have, and in many countries we have, ambassadors or representation, and almost always these organizations work at that level. But we don't really reach the organization. So my concern is with the Palestinian institutions, are they aware of the need for rapprochement to get closer to the movements and the people, the popular movements? In São Paulo, we work with the building of houses for people. Large programs, more than 10,000 people are involved in some of our housing projects and are working there. So I think it would be interesting to find that relationship.
Y esto se podría repetir en todos los países.
That's the idea I have, is that if we could have a rapprochement at that level with the institutions. And also I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to see the Ambassador of Palestine to Brazil. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Views? So if not, we come back to the respective panelists.
No, usted tiene una pregunta para discutir.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much for the question. We believe that all international conflicts only reach their conclusion if there's a recognition of the justice issues. And this seems to create problems. The Colombian process, for example, every time they're nearing a solution, the international community says, okay, but you have to. But there has to be there can't be a decree of amnesty or a clean slate. And this is aimed at things not happening again, whether it's been state terrorism or genocide. The idea is to have it never happen again. So hence, when we look at conflicts between two states, as we see it, the jurisdictional bodies need to act without any type of limitation. Fortunately, there are instruments now, such as Rome, the Rome Statute, and one cannot, in a peace treaty, create limitations on the jurisdiction of the court. And this sometimes seems like an obstacle to solving the conflicts, but it is a way to ensure that things don't happen again.
Permiso, señor presidente.
Chairman, thank you. I believe that we are still quite a ways away. Perhaps in Latin America, because I'm half Latin American, half Palestinian. So I'm speaking as a Latin American now. I think we are far from taking the Israeli war criminals or Palestinian war criminals to courts or tribunals, as we see in Europe, because of geography and the structures in place for many different reasons. But I do think that it's possible. I do think it's possible to work with boycotts and to undertake a detailed investigation of those agencies, personal security agencies. And you know that in Brazil, there are dozens of them, perhaps thousands. And they contract Israelis that are being very efficient. I say efficient, quote unquote. And how many Palestinians have been killed? I think that that has to be a first step. Investigate these companies. It's fair to do it. There should be, but it's also fair to go and investigate where these agents, the security agents, are coming from. Almost all of them are former soldiers and officers from the Israeli security forces, an army that had invaded the entire Arab world and that is still being called a defense force. So we need to work on that front. Regarding our process, it is a process of education, outreach, and we've always spoken of it thus. We do need to raise awareness, and I'm speaking as a Palestinian. I do need to teach about these issues. I come from a family that came from Haifa. I still know where my forefathers' families are. They still live in Haifa. I can give you their address and their telephone. I have to teach my children that that's Israel. But is that happening in Israel? Is that what's being taught? In the seminars, in the Talmudic seminars. They don't recognize the other, and they don't recognize the other at all. There's the Goyim, and the Jew. They don't even recognize the Brazilian or the Latino. No, Goyim, not Jewish. So there's an education process there. I have to educate my people so that they know that we signed an agreement. We have a commitment. That's Israel, and this is Palestine. I think that this is a process, and a process can take a certain amount of time. Now, books. I also agree that books have to be changed. In the Palestinian National Authority, in the state of Palestine, we have made great efforts. And all of the current books are not from Jordan, because we were part of Jordan. They're not part of Egypt, as was Gaza. No. We have textbooks now that have been made that are in step with this current era. How am I going to be able to teach my child or my children where the border is? The state's border. The first thing that one has to teach one's child is that this is your country and this is your border. If this is Israel, the occupying power, and so far they don't have a constitution, you know this, and they have not defined their borders. So the word, the first word really, has to come from Israel. Israel has to define its borders, and this is of course part of the process. It's part of the peace process. I'm not sure whether I've been able to satisfy you with my answer, but I also think that yesterday you were speaking to an important point. You're talking about the boycott of the Israeli agencies or security agencies. There's the issue of water. I'd like to commend the Argentine society for having been able to boycott an agreement with Mikrot. The Israeli occupation needs to know that the occupation comes at a cost. So far, the occupation is very advantageous to Israel, extremely advantageous. They have all of our water, they have all of our land, they have all of our space, they have the blockade on Gaza, the closure of Gaza, killing without being punished, killing without being prosecuted. They can travel around the world, even war criminals can travel to most countries, very few exceptions. And there was another question as well. Mr. de Serbach. I'm sorry, I didn't gather your full name. Rafaldo Salgueiro. It's a name from the northwest of Brazil. Northeast of Brazil. It's an amazing part of Brazil. What we hear from the press is what the press wants to give us. And that's the dilemma, really, that was mentioned yesterday by Adriana. It's one of the dilemmas that we have to address. How do we communicate these ideas? How do we reach out to all sectors of society in Latin America? And that's part of our efforts that we're undertaking. We, at least in Brazil, don't work just on the level of the government. Last year, truth be told, I undertook 32 plane trips within Brazil, domestically, 32. And I have relationships, links with political parties and with grassroots organizations. And we held a social Palestinian forum. We work with Likud, Sebra Paz, Sin Tierra, the landless. We work with all of them. And today, as I mentioned earlier in my remarks, we have 11 activists that are working together with us. This is a common effort to visit pacifists, activists in Israelis and also on the Palestinian side as well. We would accept any suggestion that you might have on this, and I appreciate your suggestion that you've made, or your comment, really. You know that Brazil is not just one country. Brazil is actually a continent in and to itself, 8.5 million square kilometers. For an embassy that has 2 people, my embassy, I think that's quite a bit to cover. So you could be the ambassador in the Northeast, as Arlene is in Sao Paulo, as La Villa is doing her work as well. And I would conclude thanking the chairman for his patience. Thank you.
I thank you. If there are no questions or comments, I shall invite the distinguished speakers to make some concluding remarks. We have some 15 minutes for all. Let's start from the left side. Do you have any concluding remark for Mr. Area?
No sé si se escucha.
Can you hear me? Is the microphone on? Okay, well, I'm not sure if this is a conclusion, really, but some thoughts on our discussions. I was there for 7 months, living in Israel and in the West Bank as well. Everyone said that the conflict was eternal, that there was no solution. There are visions from one side of the wall and visions from the other side of the wall. They were very different perspectives. A different perspective of how they saw the conflict and how they saw the people on the other side of the conflict. And it was a very powerful experience for me. I come from a family. I have a father who is a descendant of Israelis and a mother that's a descendant of Palestinians, Arab Palestinians. So it was very powerful for me to see Bethlehem and to go to see how people were living, families. And I think that the impression that I had, this powerful impression, marked me rationally and also not so rationally, to see the conflict and to see it up close and personal. One understands things that perhaps one can read about, but that without being there, it's difficult to understand. I think for this reason, it's very important not just to bring people from there to South America, to see how there is a dialogue among communities, but it's also important to take descendants of Palestinians and descendants of Israelis to go and see Israel and to go see Palestine. This might be contradictory, but I went through a program, a Jewish program, called Taglit. And Taglit invites Jews of less than 26 years of age to see Israel. And they offer a vision that's rather partial. I met Fadi Katan, who has an NGO. ISI is what the NGO is named, ISI. And he wanted to create sort of a Palestinian counterpart to this. And more than having the Palestinian version of this, I think the idea should be to bring people over. I think it's a very good idea. And if this can allow for networks to be generated, to arise from these exchanges, I think that would be very positive. That's all I would like to say at this time. Thank you very much for having invited me.
Thank you, Mr.
Señor Presidente.
Chairman, I had the privilege of participating in numerous UN causes or gestures, if you will, from UN Habitat. We looked at climate change and apartheid in South Africa. I was part of that committee as well. But there's a cause that has caused a great impression on me, and that's that the Palestinian cause encompasses a great many of these other initiatives in the UN: dignity, freedom, independence, among them. And I think that at its heart, the Palestinian cause will only be overcome in its entirety to the degree that one day, in certain areas, the United Nations, and I've seen this over a great many years, that there's been this issue of Palestine in the United Nations, which has kept me focused on a cause. This is also a cause that we see in other dimensions among other people, but the United Nations, some people think the United Nations does not have the job of solving that problem. But there's something I believe in. The solution for Israel and Palestine is not in the United Nations, but without the United Nations it won't be possible, because the implementation of any agreement that is made will compel the United Nations to participate. For this reason, until that time comes, the UN must remain its credibility and trust, not just for those of us who are here, not just for one party, such as the Palestinians, but also for the Israelis, who, with good reason, distrust openly the UN. Israel has been treated as a pariah in the organization for many years. The United Nations must recuperate their credibility with both parties, and I think that's central. I think that the UN efforts, I feel very privileged, Mr. Chairman, very honored to have been able to hear from so many people, intelligent people with their feelings and thoughts on a cause that is a cause that we all must share. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zahed. I should like to express my gratitude as well for having been able to participate and for having been able to be present with this select group of specialists and experts, Mr. Ferreira, Hindelman, Mr. Aria. This has been a learning process for me. We've heard a great many comments. We've heard from a great many people. We see some starting points, perhaps. There are many things that are made to be done. We have to take advantage of the internet, which we have now. We have Twitter, we have Facebook, we have other interesting means of communicating. Perhaps a suggestion for the organizers of the next event is that perhaps it could be more broad. There are many different sectors, from the northeast and south, to the south as well, from the entire continent, from Mexico really, all the way to Punta Arenas and Tierra del Fuego. There are many that want to participate in this and that want to make their contribution and to give their grain of salt. As Ambassador Aria has said, this is not just a cause for the people of Palestine, this is a cause for all of humanity. In my almost 39 years in Latin America, traveling from north to south, I have not met anyone who said, I'm against the Palestinian people or against the Palestinian cause. No one has said that. I think there's confusion on this point. It falls upon us as diplomats and on the academia and on the press. We have a very significant task to ensure that people cannot say, oh, I didn't know about this cause. So again, thank you for this opportunity to participate, Mr. Chairman. And lastly, I very much hope for this conference between now and tomorrow's meeting with the civil society to be able to develop a modest plan that would allow us to implement our efforts up until the next conference. I was thinking about offering this general commitment. It would be great for this committee to disappear and to become, in the best sense, a committee for the reconstruction of Palestine. I hope that that's the case, and I hope that our efforts are not in vain, and I hope that Israelis and Palestinians together can meet on the soccer field, and we'll take advantage of the World Cup soccer tournament for that purpose. Yes, my microphone's working? Very well. Chairman, members of the panel, thank you very much. Thank you to each and every one of you for this opportunity. It's a privilege for me to be next to people with such moral and intellectual authority and such knowledge. It's an honor to be able to address this group. This audience is so very highly qualified. Throughout the conference, we have heard different positions, sometimes very different positions, sometimes positions that are similar. Sometimes we've heard things from Israelis that could have been said by a Palestinian. And if we all agreed on everything, this conference wouldn't exist, so it wouldn't make sense. What I would like to underscore is that I think that there is significant progress over the Montevideo meeting. This is a climate of enormous tolerance. There's an effort to find consensus. Finding consensus doesn't mean, looking for consensus doesn't mean we will find it, but having an express will among the Palestinians and Jews, even with antagonistic stances, we still have seen a commitment to seeking consensus and to bringing a certain rapprochement and to find what points we have in common and not focus so much on the points that separate us. There's a matter on which I was questioned, and I mentioned this point. All solutions to an international conflicts are based on two fundamental pillars of our foreign policy. One is the peaceful settlement of disputes, and a strict and absolute adherence to the rule of law and international law. I took the liberty on behalf of my compatriots, even though they didn't give me any authorization to do so, to offer Uruguay to do what it can. And I really do think that the efforts to work together in each one of our countries, the diasporas, and even transmitting to their relatives living in the conflict, to transmit the tremendously peaceful, constructive harmony in which we live here. I think that's important. It would be great if we could just get the diasporas together and show that they're getting along well, and this could lead to peace. But it is an important contribution, so much so that I want to conclude with what Martin Luther King said. Dare to take the first step. Perhaps it only helps you to realize that the ladder is higher than you thought, the staircase is higher than you thought, but dare to take that first step up the staircase. Thank you very much.
This concludes our plenary 2 deliberations. On behalf of the committee, I would like to express our deep appreciation to the distinguished experts, Mr. Ferreira, Ambassador, yourself, and Mr. Gundelman, who helped to read and also to the message of the former Prime Minister of Peru, and also shared with us his conclusions. And all other participants for the valuable deliberations on this important issue.